Bang, Needs Knives. I'm Jared. My lovely wife Kara is not with us, but today we are going to do a knife talk, or I'm going to do a knife talk on grinds, edges, and blade geometry, stuff like that. I just felt like rambling for a minute about it. I also just recently got this knife. This is the Kubi Nova, and listen to the sounds of that thing. It's got a really mechanical sound. I really like it. But yeah, so we are going to talk about, I'm going to do a review on that in the future, but I've been putting out reviews and some lives, but with the videos, I don't like to just put out just review after review after review. I like to put out other things to talk about, other topics, and let's talk about this. So, blade geometry. So when I'm talking about the way a knife is ground, what I'm talking about is how it's ground from the spine of the blade down to the edge. And depending on how well it's done, depends on how easily it passes through materials. And also, depending on how consistent it is from one side to the other, and also how well it's ground, depends on how easy it is to sharpen, or also maybe sometimes the knife just is ground so inconsistent that it's hard to sharpen, or it makes it ridiculous. This is the Spyderco Domino a buddy sent me to do a review on, and he sent me a bunch of other knives, some really nice knives like this Marfione Strider. Oh, this thing is amazing. That will have a review in the future. And also a Shirogorov he let me use and sharpen and stuff like that. We'll get to that in just one second. But this Domino, its edge was just, it looked really bad. I could tell it was a factory edge. And the factory sent it out with a horrible, horrible edge. I mean, this thing was so inconsistent on one side to the other. And I spent a long time trying to fix it. And for the most part, I did fix it. There are a couple little hiccups in it, but it looks 10 times better than it did. And boy, is it sharp. It took a heck of an edge. Damn, it's sharp. Super, super sticky. Anyways, but what they did was, like, all right, I'm going to show you a picture that I drew. And basically what you're going to be looking at is, see this flat part, the part with the lettering, and this flat part, and then from the spine down to the edge. That's what this picture is going to show. And I started cutting it for some reason. But you see how it's bigger on this side than on this side? That's basically what this thing did. So it made it where right down here at the edge is bigger on one side than the other. Then right before it got to the edge, it had a couple spots where it was like a chunk was taken out. It's not really a chunk, it's just it's ground right there deeper than it is on other parts of the edge. So it made it where basically this edge right here was non-existent. Didn't even have an edge. It basically just stopped. I have a couple pictures I'll try to insert in. And then over here, if I can get it up close and show you guys, you'll see this little part. Let me get a knife to point it out. Right there, you see how it, like, that's a deep grind mark, and I'm going to show you a picture right now. So what that is where I sharpened it up to there, and it's still going on. So I don't know how far up that spot goes. Now this side was okay after I sharpened it. It was non-existent at first, but I wound up getting it kind of tuned up. The tips had problems too from one side to the other, but I basically got it really good. I mean, it's so much better than it was, but it took a lot of work and a lot of effort. Now, it was sharp, don't get me wrong, from the factory it was sharp, but it just had a horrible grind. So now when you go to resharpen it, you're going to have some issues on making it consistent, especially if you care about what it looks like. Now, depending on how a knife is also how the sharpening choil. So when we talk about a plunge grind, we're talking about, you know, here, this one shows it a little bit better. Right here, that line right there that's going down at an angle, that's the plunge grind. Now you want to make sure when you get a knife that the blade starts past the plunge grind, because if it doesn't, you'll get little inconsistencies like this, where you see how it kind of pushes out a little bit right there. And then also you'll start sharpening up on there, because when you have the knife on the stone, let me show you something. Where is the one that shows it? Doesn't matter, let me show you. So when you're sharpening, what will happen is sometimes when you have it laid nice and flat, this will push up higher because it's thicker steel. So it'll push up higher, and then it'll make you hit over here differently than if it was just nice and flat, because now it's not flat, it's going to be at an angle. It'll be perched up, and then the part right here won't get hit as easily, but this will get hit, and then this will get hit. Or you'll just have a harder time sharpening it, and you'll wind up sharpening into it. That's why a lot of people you'll see will cut like a little notch, like say right here. This one has a little notch cut out, so you don't have to worry about hitting it. And this one's a little differently because it's ground different, but you understand what I'm saying. I also had to do like this ZTO 450. This thing, after sharpening it so many times, I had to put a cutout there. But also, let me show you guys another picture. Depending on how a knife is ground depends on how easily it pushes through material. And here's a couple different ideas on grind. So like this one right here is basically like a thick blade stock with a nice deep hollow grind. And then this would be like a kind of a nice flat grind, decently thick blade stock, and then it slowly tapers down to the very tip. This would be like a horrible grind right here. It's very thick blade stock, and then it rapidly drops down to the tip. Imagine pushing through materials with something like that. It'd be like pushing a wedge through something. Now this would be like a laser, very thin blade stock, and then it slowly, very slowly drops down to a nice precise tip. Now this to me would be like the in between a hollow and a flat grind, where it's got a decently thick blade stock, and then it slowly drops down, and then it gets down to a point, and it basically goes straight from here to here, and then slowly goes down to a tip. So it makes it to where for a flat ground blade, you can sharpen it a whole bunch of times, kind of like this. Well, you can sharpen it a whole bunch of times, and it's not going to it's not going to dramatically get thicker. Unlike, say, like a Ritter Hogue or a Benchmade Griptilian, the more you sharpen it, the thicker they get. Every sharpening gets a little thicker, a little thicker, and a little thicker. Now, these knives are supposed to be hard-use knives, but you can get a nice thin edge and still have a hard-use knife. There's a lot of knives out there that prove that they have a nice thick blade stock, yet they come down to a super thin edge, and it's a strong, tough edge, especially if you have a good heat treat. Now, heat treat has a lot to do with it, because the difference between a good heat treat and a great heat treat is night and day. Now, I'm not saying that having a good heat treat is bad. Having just a regular good heat treat is amazing. It makes it to where it's easier to sharpen, and, you know, holds an edge and everything else. But a great heat treat it's amazing to sharpen. So easy to sharpen, and it also holds it, and then you can get a nice thin edge when you're sharpening, and it holds up nice and strong. Like this, you see how this is laid back? You see how thick that bevel is, my edge? See how thick that edge is? That's because it's like 30 thousandths behind the edge. So when I lay my edge back a little bit, this makes it easier to pass through materials. Now, a lot of factory edges aren't laid back that thin or that fine. This Shuro, I sharpened this thing. This thing's edge originally was laid back a little bit farther than I thought was okay, but I did notice this thing had an amazing heat treat, and it was ground so good. They got past the plunge grind right there with their sharpening choil, and it's so consistent all the way up that it just made for just a joy to sharpen. Everything went so perfectly. It was so easy to hold the angle, and it was so easily to match the angle from one side to the other when I was sharpening it, because they ground it very, very nicely. If they grind the knife very nice, it's nice to sharpen. It's easy to sharpen. Now this one, the edge, I shouldn't talk too much about it because I do have a review going to be coming up soon, but it wasn't too bad. The grind was somewhat decent, and it was easy to sharpen. This is D2, and it seems like it's pretty good right now. I'm sure it had a burnt edge, but it wasn't bad, and it sharpened really nicely, and it was pretty consistent. But there are a lot of knives that aren't consistent, and then they make these little mistakes like this. Look at that. The plunge grind, the edge goes past the plunge grind. What? Buck, you've been doing knives longer than I've been alive. And every single one of them had this, so it's not just mine. They literally sent this out like this, where that doesn't make any sense to me. And it's not like this little angle had to hit anything over here. This is what locks up, is right here. Watch. See that? Bang. So it doesn't make any sense that they couldn't just have raised the sharpening choil. And it made it a lot easier to sharpen, because now when I sharpen, this is so thick down here, I have to concentrate on it, and it makes it to where it's a little harder to sharpen. It's not that bad. I mean, especially since I've dealt with this so many times. But for people that haven't dealt with it 100 times, it makes it very difficult. Sometimes you have to put a little cutout like that. See the little cutout? Because otherwise you are going to grind into thick steel. So you can cut it out yourself, but you shouldn't have to. These are knife companies. They know you're going to sharpen your knife, right? At least they should want you to. Now Civivi, they are doing a killer job with their knives. They're making great blade geometry, nice thin or thick blade stocks. Regardless, they still taper down very nicely where it's meant to cut. That's one thing I love about a knife, is when it is meant to cut. Because let's be real, what are these things for? They're made to cut. And even on Civivi's flat grinds, they do them very well. I mean, you see, it's very consistent. I didn't sharpen this one, but I can see and tell it's very consistent. I would love to sharpen this knife for my buddy that sent that. Now, another knife company that's doing great blade geometries are Tucson with flat ground blades. Sorry, because to me, Civivi and WE Knives, they're doing really good hollows. Tucson is doing great flat ground blades. Now, there's a lot of companies doing great hollow grinds. There's a lot of companies doing great flat grinds, but there's some that they could do a little better. They've been in the business long enough that they don't need to make such thick blade stocks. They are not even blade stocks, but thick edges. There's knives that have twice as thin edges that are twice as hard use. So basically the edge on some of the harder use knives are twice as thin. Like, think of the SOCOM Elite. The edge is like 12 to 15 thousandths or something like that. Half as thin as this, and the blade stock is like double as thick. It's a hard use knife. It's like twice as hard use as this, yet it's you know, the edge is thinner. Because the thinner the edge, the better it's going to pass through materials. Now, yes, of course, you can lay your edge back like this. You can lay your edge back and make it nice and big, and it still gets stupid sharp like this. See how sharp that is? This thing is very sharp. You see it picking at my skin? I'm barely touching it. Look what it's doing to my skin on my fingers. This thing is stupid sharp. I mean, it is ridiculous how sharp this is, and I'm barely touching it. But going through the materials, not just biting into them, because it's one thing to bite into the material, because like paper's so easy to cut. So this doesn't tell me nothing. That says nothing. What does that say? Nothing. Nothing at all. Now do that with foam. Do that with thick rope. Do that with a lot of different materials and things, like plastic straps and stuff like that. Yeah, you can probably cut down and bite it, but not like a thick, heavy-duty, wide plastic strap. You want something nice and thin that's going to not just bite into the material, but continue to spread the material like this. Because you want the material. Sorry, I'm hitting the camera. You want the material to go around the knife, not. And some material doesn't do that. Some material just spreads out like that. Now with some material like that, it'll be a little bit easier to do it with. Like wood or something like that. If you're shaving wood, that'd be a little easier with a thick blade stock, thick edge. But a thin blade stock's always going to do it better. Always. So, and and there's some thick knives that with thick edges that are good. They're great, and they do their purpose, they do their job, and if that's what they're for, that's what they're for. I mean, but there's so many little inconsistencies that I see that companies are doing with their grinds. Like they'll grind just one little spot in the middle of the blade. I had a knife the other day I sharpened, and 3 spots, not this one, but 3 spots like this was different. So it's like when I held my angle all the way across, this edge would be thicker than right here, and then this would be thick again, and then thinner, and it was crazy. Like to hold that angle and keep changing, like so, like for me to sharpen a knife and change my angle from here to here to here to here to here, that's ridiculous. It's nearly impossible. You have to have a really thin stone to do something like that, and it's pathetic to think that you're going to be able to match that up on both sides. Here's the mini bug out. But I just wanted to talk about some blade geometries and some edges with you guys, and how to keep an eye out for the little details. A lot of times you'll notice it on the edge. When you notice like an edge, if it all of a sudden looks like a wave, or you'll see an edge have an edge, and then all of a sudden right here it just disappears. That's because of the grind most of the time. So watch for some of that stuff. Now, maybe you'll get a knife. I've gotten knives that have stupid grinds. And now to sharpen it, it's ridiculous. I just want to send it back. Because I'm going to have to sharpen that thing for the rest of its life. And I'm going to have a horrible time. I'm going to hate it. I'm not going to want to carry it. Because I'm going to know at the end of the day, I have another knife that's better. I have another knife that's easy to sharpen, that I can put right on the stone and get sharp in 15 minutes. Stupid sharp. Or I can spend an hour on an edge that's wavy, or where the grind is ridiculous. And I'm not even just talking about how thick they are. I'm talking about when they're inconsistent. When like this side will be deeper than this side. The ricasso right here will be way deeper ground than this side. Or right here on the blade, it'll have like a chunk missing out of it. Because when they were grinding, they had either a bad belt, or they had a belt that was wore, so some parts of it weren't grinding that deep, and then one part of the belt was just grinding away. So it made it to where the grind is like a wave. You can't see it. The only place you can see it is on the edge. And sometimes edges, people see edges and they won't look that great. And a lot of times it's not the sharpener, it's the grind of the knife. Speaking of that, I need to put this on a strap. I think that is sharp, and it's got some teeth. But some knife companies are doing it really good. Sometimes there are mistakes. Mistakes happen. And sometimes it's just a fluke. But other companies are doing it amazing. They're just doing a great, great job. They're always giving you a good sharpening choil. They're always giving you a good grind. They're always giving you good blade geometry. It's always even on both sides. And for cheap production companies, not cheap, sorry. For regular production companies, they should be. It is a machine doing it. It is a robot doing the grinds, usually. They put it in a CNC machine, and a CNC machine is doing the grind. So, of course, they can be consistent from one side to the other. Now, if it's a human grinding it, it's a little different because they're doing it by the feel and by, like looking at and staring at. A robot is a robot. They're going to be a little more consistent. So you want to see them be a little more consistent. Now, when they're not consistent, it's usually because their bit, the tool that they had that was going back and forth right here and grinding this out and cutting it out was going bad, and they didn't switch it. Because to get really good grinds, they got to constantly switch the bits, the tool that is, grinds all this down. Now, some of the companies might do partial, like half and half, where the machine does half the work and then they do the rest by hand. It depends on the company, I guess. But I give a little more leeway to somebody who did it by hand versus a factory. Now, somebody who did it by hand is going to cost a lot more, but you're paying for the hand, for a human to be doing it, for it not to be done by a robot, for a human to get in there and do the grind work and get as consistent as they possibly can from one side to the other, and paying attention to every little tiny detail. And then they get their hands on it and they can feel it, they can see it. That's what you're paying for the most part, when you're paying for a custom or for a handmade one. So, yeah, I just wanted to talk about this, guys. I love you guys, and hopefully this was interesting to you guys. It's been going on for 21 minutes, and I know this is stupid long. I apologize. Love you guys. Peace.